Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, we are taking a forward-looking perspective to explore the way ahead in the theme of vitalizing urban neighborhoods and space through transit-oriented development. This is day 4 of the TDLC Technical Deep Dive, which will be open to the public through Vimeo video stream for the first 2 sessions. For those joining us from this Vimeo stream, and for all of our esteemed TDLC participants, welcome to today's very exciting lineup of presentations and speakers. My name is Victor Mulas. I am the team lead of the World Bank Tokyo Development Learning Center, and I will be your moderator for today. Let me start with a few housekeeping announcements so we can all enjoy today's content at its fullest. The first session of today will be conducted in English, while the second one will be both Japanese and English languages. If you are watching this as a public event through Vimeo, please refer to the instructions on how to access the translation posted in the Vimeo page. So let's start today's program. The pandemic has impacted our lives. It has changed the way we live, the way we move, we work, we communicate, and we socialize with each other, all of which are activities we do in cities. COVID-19 has brought many challenges, but it's also opening many opportunities. It is often said that innovation and new ideas came out of crisis and big challenges, and in this case, cities have responded. Today, we will explore the opportunities that this COVID crisis is bringing to cities. Our first session is Livability and Placemaking in a Post-COVID World. Annie Gapihan, Urban Development Specialist at the World Bank, will be the moderator for this session. Annie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Victor, and thank you to everybody for joining this session. So I'd like to quickly introduce the 2 speakers that we have for this session. We have a very exciting lineup. First, we have Gil Penalosa. Gil is passionate about creating equitable and sustainable cities where all people can live healthier and happier. Gil is the founder and chair of the Canadian nonprofit organization 880 Cities. He's also first ambassador of World Urban Parks. He's worked in over 350 different cities on all continents. Before emigrating to Canada, Gil was commissioner in Bogota. He holds an MBA from UCLA, a doctorate honoris causa from SLU's Urban Planning Sweden. Gil is Planet Design's top 50 most influential urbanists and recently received in Australia the World Urban Parks Distinguished Individual Award. After Gil's presentation, we'll also have Paul Barter speak. Paul is a consultant, researcher, trainer, writer, and podcaster, best known for his parking policy expertise. Paul has had research, policy, and training strengths on international comparisons of urban transport, travel demand management, public transport regulation, and other topics. He's written extensively on public parking policy and provided insights to various metropolitan governments as a consultant to international organizations as well, such as the World Bank and GIZ. Since 2000, Paul has taught at the National University of Singapore, mostly in the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy as an assistant professor, and since 2012 as an adjunct associate professor. So as I said, we're very excited for this session. We're looking very much forward to hearing about the experiences that Paul and Gil can share. So I'll hand it over to Gil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie. I'm gonna share some slides. We are talking today about cities, post-COVID cities. Let's remember that half of the homes that we will have in 40 years do not exist today, do not exist. We have about 3.5 billion people living in cities. Within our children's lifetime, we're gonna go to 7 billion. That's why, and it could be very civilized, where people walk and ride bicycles and use public transit and have dense cities, and where all people can enjoy nature, close to home, to work, to every place. That's why TOD is so critical, transit-oriented development. So Monday, I spoke about the what and the why. And some of the elements I mentioned was equity. We need to evaluate our cities by how do we treat our most vulnerable people, and our most vulnerable are the children and elderly by age, but also everyone that is poor with disabilities, racial minorities, ethnic minorities, the women. It's not about creating a Disney world for the wealthy and healthy, 20-60. Two, I said mobility and land use are 2 sides of the same coin. Almost everything around TOD deals with this. exist in the footprint. We should grow all of this population growth idea. It should be in the existing footprint. Stop sprawl, horizontal and vertical, dense cities. Eventually, everything will work. But sprawl cities, nothing will work. It's critical. And there are many ways to densify. It's not just about 40-story buildings. We get the same density with 6-story buildings next to each other. I said about housing, supply and demand doesn't work. Government has to intervene because land is fixed. At 5, walking, every trip begins and ends by walking. So walking has to be a priority. We got to think of the children, of the adults, of the older adults, of everyone. 6, we need to ride bicycles, which is the most efficient way of mobility. If it's not safe for an 8 and an 8-year-old, it's nothing. Don't even call it a bikeway. We got to think of the children, not of the people in spandex. 7 is a citywide public transit, not just one lane, a citywide system that we need. And if we're going to do the mobility map, we got to keep in mind, we want one of these or 140 of those, one of these or 146 of those. And we saw examples from Tanzania, from Tokyo. 8, nature everywhere, at home, on the sidewalks. 9, park system, small, medium, large. We also said that we needed to have public realm. Everything public has to link into each other and help and motivate each other. 11, we need to have mixed cities, and mix is mixed by income, by age, by ethnicity, mixed in every way, places to live and to work. We saw this sprawl, how whenever you do public transit, you densify a little bit, and all of a sudden, people that could not walk to anything, all of a sudden they can walk to if you densify a little bit, and having home and shops and all. And last, I mentioned we need to engage citizens. Very important to engage. We need to get people of all ages, and if they don't come to us, I said we need to go to them. So I said all of these elements are about TOD and transit-oriented, and also about vitalizing urban neighborhoods. Why? It's the benefits. The benefits is the so that was Monday. What and why? Today we're talking about the how. How? If we want cities that are equitable and sustainable, where people are going to live healthier and happier, we need to develop a sense of urgency. COVID arrived, and some people say that everything changed. I don't think much has changed. I think our perception changed. It's like if we had gotten some magnifying glasses to see our cities and actually saw some issues that were there before. All of a sudden, the invisible became visible. We saw with 80% of the hotels empty, we saw people sleeping on the sidewalks, on the streets, on the parks. But a horrible situation is also an opportunity. When we saw fewer cars, all of a sudden, people started building networks of protected bikeways all over the cities. All of a sudden, something that usually would take many, many years was starting to being done in months or being done in weeks. From Paris to Berlin, in Bogota, and all over the places. All of a sudden, we saw that we needed to be physically separated, socially connected, but physically separated. And even when there were no parks, streets were taken over. Auckland, New Zealand, having streets for people. Oakland, California, they did 72 miles, 115 kilometers in 24 hours. All of the neighborhood streets were given to people. And only cars that can go there is the cars of the people that live on that street. Otherwise, you need to be on the arterials. If there is a traffic jam, you need to wait on the arterial, but the neighborhood streets are not to cut through. Bus only lanes were created overnight, and they were working very well. Markets on the streets. We need to remember the streets are public space. The streets are about 30% of our cities. We saw golf courses like in San Francisco. Golf courses turned in 24 hours into a park. So instead of a golf course used by 200 people, now parks used by thousands and thousands and thousands. All of a sudden, the impossible, what we thought was impossible, became possible. I mean, even the golf course is an analogy that is interesting because in many cities, there are public golf courses where only 200 people can play a day. There is no moral or ethical justification to have public golf courses in cities that have a deficit of parks or housing. I mean, just think about it. If we didn't have the golf course, we had money, and we could buy land for either public golf courses or for parks and housing. Would we buy the land for the golf course or for the park and housing? I mean, think of that it was not a golf course. Think it was 10 cricket pitches. What would we do? I mean, these are many ethical decisions that we need to take in the cities as we move forward. I think that's part of the legacy of the COVID, that we are in this together. Before immigrating to Canada, I was commissioner in Bogota, and I learned that it's not about the money, it's about vision and action. When I was commissioner in my previous life, for example, we built over 200 parks all over the city, small and big and large. There was one of them. The Pope had come here to give a mass for 1 million people, and then the Pope left and nothing happened. Nothing happened in 27 years. Why nothing happened? Because change is hard. Change is hard in Bogota or in Delhi or in Copenhagen or in Tokyo. Everywhere. You try to change and the cave people show up. Who are the cave people? They are the citizens against virtually everything. So it's very important that each one of us don't take no for an answer. We need to find solutions to the problems, not problems to the solutions. So it was like this for 27 years, not even sidewalks. And in 4 years, we turned it into the nicest park. For active, for passive, for contemplative recreation, for things that people can do at any time. It's also for passive, to see people of all ages and enjoy nature, or do massive programs with lots of people. It's really a combination. It's the uses and the activities that makes parks function. It's not about architectural awards. It's about the uses and the activities, and it's something that is critical. But of course, it's not only about 1 or 2 iconic parks in the city. Any city can do it. It's about also doing hundreds and hundreds of small parks, especially in the low-income areas. Everybody should have a small park within a short walk everywhere in the world. This is absolutely critical for physical and mental health of people. And that is something that is very, very important. Also because it improves safety. It improves the environment. It improves the quality of life of all. Something else that I did is I found a small program with a few kilometers and a few thousand people, the Ciclovia, that had been around since 1974. And in only a few years, 4 years, we turned it into the world's largest pop-up park. It's really fantastic. This should be done in any city, everywhere in the world. Simple, open streets to people, clubs into car, and the magic happens. You get, these are by income levels. I was obsessed of connecting the poorest neighborhoods of the city with the wealthiest neighborhoods of the city, as well as all of the parks. And you get young and old and rich and poor. Some people walk, some people bike, some people skate, some people just chill. They chat with each other. This is about people are social beings. We want to be with other people. Every Sunday, 1 out of 4 people come out. 52 Sundays of the year plus holidays. Why is this important in your city? Because it changes minds. All of a sudden, people realize that the streets are public space. They belong to everybody, and they can have different uses according to the time of the day of the week of the year. That's why many other cities are doing it. It's about social integration. It's almost the only place where you have people, you there from India to Paris to any place, where we meet each other as equals. The owners of the large corporations and their families meeting with their minimum wage workers and their families are equals. They don't live in the same building. Their children don't even go to the same school. But here, they meet as equals. That's why so many cities are doing it. I mentioned that in Bogota, in 1990, built 280 kilometers of protected bikeways where there was not 1 inch from Alaska to Argentina. And developing a network was important, especially given it in the low-income neighborhoods. This is not just in the upper income where many cities are doing it. Oh, it's cheap because they see it in New York, they want to do it. No. And why good quality? Because it's about dignity. It's about safety. And whatever you do, you have to have physical separation. There are many, many ways to have physical separations, but you need to separate the pedestrians from the cyclists and the cyclists from the cars. That is absolutely important for safety for everybody. By the way, in December 2019, Bogota had 540 kilometers of protected bike lanes, 850,000 daily trips. That's more than the population of Copenhagen, of everybody in Copenhagen. So this is not insignificant to have 850,000 daily trips. Of those, 200,000 are done by women. Women are an indicator. When it's really, really safe in all kinds of safety is 50-50, 50 women, 50 men. So Bogota, of course, has to improve the safety in order to have it 50-50. And with COVID-19, of course, had a huge mobility impact. Many people are staying home. The cycling share was 9% before COVID in January 2020. Now it's about 13%. So all of mobility went down. But of course, the car mobility and other modes went down much more than bike. We'll see what happens a year from now if cycling stays up or ends up somewhere in the middle between 9 and 13. But nevertheless, that is a very respectful. That's more than any city in North, South, Central America, Africa, and most countries in the world. Also, Bogota started a BRT system in 1998 when only a small city, Curitiba, had it. And people said, what? Like a subway but above ground? Not even the World Bank that was going to put money thought that it was possible. This used to be the system. In 3 years, the first line was built. In 36 months, from idea to implementation, including buying many, many houses on sites to create space for the sidewalks, for the bikeways. And this system, by the way, this line moves more people than 90% of the subways of the world. And now hundreds and hundreds of cities are doing it, and also many of them are coming to learn about this. And last year, Bogota purchased almost 600 electric buses, the largest fleet in the Americas, and 1,441 2- and 3-body buses with the cleanest energy, the cleanest diesel, and many of them gas. Also, cable cars. And the subway, the first line of subway system was designed and contracted, and now it's under construction. With all of the TOD and the redesign of the popular. Why am I talking about Bogota? When obviously not an ideal city, because Bogota is not one of the wealthiest countries, one of the wealthiest cities in the world. So it's to show that this is possible. But let's forget a little bit about Bogota. Let's move on sustainable mobility in general. I'm talking about walking, riding bicycles, using public transit, new uses of cars. Walk and bike is not a joke. This could be any street anywhere in the world. Walk and bike is not a frivolity. This little girl knows it. Walking and cycling is the only individual mode of mobility of most people. It's the only individual mode of all children and youth around the world. You might be the son or the daughter of the wealthiest person. If you're under 16, your only individual mode of mobility is to walk or to bike. So doing it safe and enjoyable should be almost like a human right, the right to safe and enjoyable mobility. Unless you think that only the people with the money and the age and the desire to have a car have a right to individual mobility. That's why we're also talking about democracy and human rights and equality and sustainability, because everything is really linked to everything. So how do we want to live? Walking is critical because every single trip begins and ends by walking. Just like the birds fly, people, we walk. We walk in the middle of the winter, in the middle of the summer, in all kinds of extreme weather. And we're so happy because we use all our senses. We see the children playing and the youth in job or going to school. We hear the birds singing. We go from a coffee shop and we smell the aroma. Parents and children walk. Older adults walk. We walk in the summer. We walk in the winter. But we need to make it safe. Safe. And it's not safe. Yesterday, people driving cars killed 741 people walking. You know, 2 years ago, 3 planes crashed and everybody died. 2 planes. What happened? All the 737s were grounded. Well, every single day, the equivalent of 5 737s yesterday, 5 today, 5 tomorrow, are the people walking that are killed by people driving. They're not accidents. Accidents is when they cannot be avoided. They're incidents. So we need to develop activity like Vision Zero. No one should die on the streets, walking, cycling, in cars, in public transit. But if you say we're Vision Zero, but you don't put the money or the actions, then you really become a zero vision city. We know what needs to be done. This is not a technical issue. If we're going to improve walking, we need to lower the speed. All of the streets of the city should be 30 kilometers an hour, except the arterials that might be 50 kilometers an hour. Why? Because if you get hit by a driver with a car at 30 kilometers an hour, there is 5% probability of being killed. At 50 is more than 80. And so we know this. So the decision makers are making a decision how many people are going to be killed. Are you going to put it at 30, at 35, at 40? You are deciding how many people are going to get killed. If you put a small island on a crosswalk, we eliminate more than half of the incidents. Why are we doing crosswalk without an island? The kids are going on a field trip, not all of them crossing one line. They wait and then they continue on their field trip. We know that those small islands are going to eliminate more than half of the incidents for people of all ages. The footpaths or the sidewalks are not a priority in so many cities. This is not a priority when we do sidewalks like this all over the place, or when in order to move cars, we invest millions to do an elevated pedestrian, which is not pedestrian. That's not for pedestrians. That is so that the cars go faster. Just put a good line and good crosswalk, and people prefer to walk. No one wants to go up 60 steps to cross and come back. This is a symbol of lack of democracy when you see cars all over the sidewalks. It's the owners of the car saying, I'm rich and I'm wealthy and I'm powerful and I don't care what you do. So the sidewalks are so absolutely critical anywhere in the world. Even worse, when we don't even do sidewalks and we're telling people every single day, you are a second-class citizen. The sidewalks, this is in a city where, like many emerging country cities, 13% of the people use cars, 40% walk. But nevertheless, look at the roads. Amazing roads for that 13%. No sidewalks, no protected bikeways. When obviously that should have been the priority. We really need to be consistent between what we think, what we say, and what we do. The sidewalks are the most important infrastructure in any city. That's where people meet boyfriends and girlfriends. We develop a sense of belonging on the sidewalks. We meet the neighbors, the people that sell flowers and fruits and coffee. We need to decide how are we going to be doing. We need to get the cars out of the sidewalks. We use the sidewalks in the summertime. We use them in the wintertime. The children catch Pokemons on the sidewalks. We catch public transit on the sidewalks. The sidewalks are amazing in cities of any size, have to be an absolute priority. And the sidewalks, in many ways, they remind us that walking is much more than walking. It's delightful to walk in Buenos Aires and see people dancing tango on the sidewalks. The sidewalks are almost part of the family of the parks. But of course, sustainable mobility is not just walking. It's also riding bicycles, using public transit, new uses of cars. So we got to incorporate all. This could be any city around the world, how children should be going to school, people of all ages. Any city could be as good as Copenhagen. This is not rocket science. Copenhagen is very cold in the winter, it's hot in the summer, it rains all year round, and they have money. They have money to have cars, but they ride bicycles because it's safe, it's inexpensive, it's connected. And they said there's no such thing as bad weather, it's bad clothing. So Copenhagen is an amazing example, but all of the arterials have physical separated at one level for the cars, at another level for bikes, at another level for pedestrians. 41 out of 100 trips are done on bicycle. And they want to go down to 50%. And men don't need shirts in the summer or women's special shoes. They need safe facilities so that people of all ages can ride their bikes. And they continue to improve with traffic at the speed of the cyclists and bridges and counters. Look at this, with snow and all of this, and over 16,000 cyclists have gone by this one. This is how people move in Copenhagen. So when we're talking about that we're going to double the population in cities, what if this was one of our goals? And Copenhagen and Amsterdam, they went from a crisis to a change of behavior. It's not because the Danish are so different. No, it's because there was an oil crisis in the 70s around the world. People, very similar to now, people couldn't use cars many days. And so people started riding their bicycles, and there was no infrastructure. So many children were being killed, especially, and older people and novice. So there were a lot of activism. And the first protected bikeway was built in 1982. Look what happens if you build a network of protected bikeways. What happened with the use of bicycles? So it's your decision. What kind of city do you want? It's critical. And to improve bikeability, remember, if it's not safe for an 80 and an 80, it's nothing. Don't call it a bikeway. So we need to think of the children. We need to think of the not of the experts in spandex, but the children and the novice and the older adults and the immigrants from countries that are not experts on cycling, and the older adult on a tricycle. These are some things nice to have, but they don't get people cycling. Parking, maps, racks on the buses. This improves for the 1 or 2% already cycling. If you want to improve, the only two things that increase cycling is lower the speed in the neighborhoods, in all of the streets that are non-arterial, and develop a network of protected bikeways. So everything I say about 30K for walking is also for cycling, but we need to develop a network of protected bikeways for all ages and abilities, AAA, all ages and abilities. And we need to have connectivity. Some cities just do one and say, oh, let's see if it works. No, it doesn't work. If it doesn't connect origins and destinations, it's not going to work. So we need to think of the daytime and nighttime and the doors opening. And if you don't have the political will or money to do it permanently like this one, do not just paint a line. Enhance the painted line with bollards each 2 meters, and it will make a whole world of difference. That's why people back in Copenhagen, because there is a network. You can go from anywhere to anywhere with AAA bikeways. And if we're going to improve public transit, my brother mayor said a civilized city is not the one where the poor have cars. It's the one where the rich use public transit. That's the civilized city. And part of it is marketing. The name of the system, the colors, the uniforms, the positioning. Yesterday, I showed you that some people don't like buses, so Malmo put a nose and covered the wheels. That's marketing. We need to have speed, connectivity, and frequency for people to use public transit. And when I talk about the physical space, but look at this. This can be done, but it takes political will. First, it takes city vision, it takes action, and it takes guts. The public transit is rapid not if the wheels are rubber or metal. It's if it has dedicated lanes and prepaid fares and so on. Remember, walking, cycling, and transit takes up a lot less space than cars. This is Tokyo's BRT system. There are some elements to consider: the capacity, the capital cost, the operating cost, but also the environmental impact. And you know the numbers. Walking and cycling have the less impact on the footprint, on the gas emissions than any other modes. Think of Nairobi. They will say, with the same money, can we do 9 kilometers of metro, 22 of light rail, or 86 of BRT? Think of this corridor, the capacity on each corridor, but also think of the capital cost versus capacity. So on one edge, we have the capital cost. On the other, the passengers per direction. Some are cute, like some people like the LRT because they look cute. Yes, they're nice, but they carry very few people. Maybe some buses are not as cute, but they carry a lot more people when they are BRT. So it's up to you to decide. And Tanzania, Dar es Salaam has a wonderful system that is really an example to the world how to get it done. So this is quite important on how to. Guangzhou in China moves more people this BRT than any subway line in China except number 2 in Beijing. And we need to have parks near the stations and near the homes. People say small or large parks. Well, we need to have both. Small neighborhood parks, because that's where we develop a sense of belonging. We meet our neighbors. We develop solidarity. But we also need the medium-sized park where we can play football and other activities. But we also need the large size. So we need all, the small, the medium, the large. We need a citywide park system. People say the small or the large is like when say trails in parks. Well, are they recreation or transportation? They are both. So also let's put a lot of attention to the paths because they take us into nature and it's something that is magnificent. Sometimes we're going to use it for recreation. Sometimes we're going to use it for transportation. But this has to be totally integrated into the mobility system and into the quality of lives. And as we move forward, post-COVID is about health and nature. And the schools need to be community hubs, where they are for students from 8 to 5 p.m. Monday through Saturday, but in the evening, Saturdays, Sundays, on holidays, they can be opened up, the libraries, everything. It's not about copying, but yes, we can adapt. For example, some people, instead of building roads, they're taking roads for cars and making it roads for people. You know, in Seoul, they had this river 60 years ago, and they built 6 lanes on top of the river. And then it got full, so they said, let's do a second floor. And it got 4, and they said, let's do a 3rd floor. No, they said, no city has solved mobility. No city has solved mobility through the private car. So the mayor, in 13 kilometers to the middle of Seoul, they tore it down. The second, the first, they brought the river, they put public transit. People said, Mayor, are you crazy? People are not going to stop for coffee. Well, they couldn't stop for coffee at 100 kilometers an hour. Now they do because they have a 13-kilometer linear park and small and slow traffic on both sides. These are the kind of bold decisions. Oros, they had a small city, had a river. Also, 40 years ago, they paved it. And now what happened 8 years ago? They wanted to attract people. So they brought it out. These are the difference of the cities. You know, in Copenhagen, in the meatpacking industry, they were going to do 6 lanes for cars or only 2. Imagine those thousands and thousands of people living in those 6, 8-story buildings if this was 6 lanes for cars instead of having it this. So this is something that changes. This is Portland. This is Madrid. So this can be done in many places. Paris now says the Champs-Élysées, they're going to green half of Champs-Élysées. New York, this is Vitoria-Gasteiz in Spain. Is this even ethical that many emerging countries are doing this when the ones that tried it know that it didn't work and are tearing them down? Why are we doing this craziness? Why are we tearing apart our cities to do elevated highways when we know that they do not work? Would they do this across some wealthy neighborhood? I mean, they're doing it so fast that they're even falling down. Instead, we could do things like this street built 3 years ago in Bogota, which is with protected bikeways and with wide sidewalks and densifying and so on. It's totally different. So to end, we must change. We must plan cities radically different. We must manage them radically different. There's not going to be a Martian coming down to say, I'm going to fix your cities. We need to change. Why don't we change? Because change is hard. Doing more of the same is easy, but let's keep in mind, we can go from a crisis to a change of behavior. 3 recommendations. Change is not unanimous. Don't wait for unanimity. Number 2, the general interest must prevail over the particular. And number 3, the cost of doing nothing is not nothing. So now we have a huge opportunity because with COVID, people are thinking of something different, coming back, building back better. Well, this is the moment to do changes. If we don't change in 2021, if it doesn't start now, it's going to be almost impossible later on. These are not technical issues. These are not financial issues. This is about policy, but not about political parties. On the left, on the right, everybody should be interested in doing cities for people. We're going to have a big P. Everybody needs to participate. It's about planning the land use and the public spaces and the mobility. It's about the TOD. It's about management with passion, with leadership, with perseverance. I invite you to be bold. Benchmark with cities that are better than you, because you will always find cities that are worse than you. So don't benchmark with cities that are worse than you. Build alliances with the schools and the business and the faith groups and the parks and everybody. Develop a shared vision. How do you want your city? But vision is not enough. You need to have action, action, action. Because if you have vision and you don't have action, you become frustrated. You know what needs to be done, but you don't do it. But if you have developed a shared vision of the city that you want, and you develop all of the action, then you're going to be able to move from talking to doing in creating cities that are equitable and sustainable, where all of your citizens are going to be able to live healthier and happier. And that has to be the goal. So everyone on the call, let's do it. But let's do it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gil. That was a really, really engaging, really exciting presentation. You presented some very bold examples of how to transform our cities in a post-COVID world to make sure that they are more livable, that they're safer, that they're more vibrant, more equitable. So these are some really, really exciting ideas that I know all of the participants that are watching are going to be thinking about this. And I think one of the key points that you brought up is transforming our cities often involves giving streets and public spaces back to people. So this is a perfect segue into our second speaker, Paul, where Paul is going to share a lot of really good ideas of how cities can think through reallocating space on streets and in other public spaces in urban areas, taking that space from cars and giving it back to people. So Paul, over to you. Well, Paul, I think you may be muted.
Sorry about that.
That's perfect. We see your screen and we hear you well.
Yes. So thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks, Gil. Gil is a very hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. I'm planning to persuade you that we can make parking policy consistent with plentiful, well-used public transport, and I hope to do that in about 10 minutes. Let's try. Here's the outline. I'm going to talk about a few parking basics just so we understand the key fundamentals. Then I'll try to argue 4 main points and persuade you of 4 main points, or at least open your mind to these 4 main points. 1, that on-street parking management is vital. 2, that government boosting of parking supply is both harmful and unnecessary. And 3, that we should think of parking spaces as serving the whole district, the whole neighborhood that they're in, rather than just the site that they're on. And finally, if we get the parking basics right, we can actually use parking policy to limit traffic and boost public transport. We can be more ambitious once we get the basics right. So what are some parking basics? Thinking about parking clearly. Parking takes a lot of space. Specifically, I'm talking about car parking. Two-wheeler parking, bicycles, even motorcycles, takes much, much less space. But car parking takes more space than you might think if you're just focused on the vehicle itself. Think of all the aisles, the turning space, the ramps. And it turns out that the parking space for just one car in an off-street parking area is similar to the amount of housing space that many of us have even in quite rich cities like Singapore. Parking is also inexpensive. It's surprisingly expensive. It's probably obvious to you that underground parking is very expensive. Elevated built structures for parking is expensive to build. They're expensive to build, slightly less than underground. But even surface parking is very, very expensive if the land that it's on is expensive. And in all of the prime places, the prime transit-oriented development places that we're talking about in this program, land is expensive. So parking is expensive in all of the places that we are interested in. And yet, in many of the places across most of our cities, parking is free of charge for the motorists. It's not really free, of course. I just said it was expensive. It's actually bundled. It's not free. It's bundled with things. Everyone pays for parking regardless of whether they're driving, whether they own a car, because the parking is wrapped up in the cost of everything else. One useful framework to keep ourselves on track, especially in transit-oriented development, is to focus our minds on accessibility, how easy it is for people to reach places. And parking is part of accessibility, but it's part of access by car, and only by car. And because car-based access, both on the roads and in the form of parking, is very, very wasteful of space and inefficient, because of that, too much parking can actually harm multimodal accessibility, the kind of accessibility that matters, total accessibility. We can actually increase total accessibility very often, especially in transit-oriented locations, by reducing parking. And that's where I'll end later in the talk. So a key fundamental is that a lot of cities have stated goals to reduce car use and increase public transport, increase cycling, walking, etc. But their parking policies don't match that. And we need to make our parking policies line up with our wider priorities. And to do that, of course, we need to actually solve real parking problems. We don't want to cause a parking mess in the process. But we don't want to try to solve our parking problems by having excessive parking, a glut of parking that just fuels car dependence, car ownership, and as I said just now, actually harms multimodal accessibility. So let's move on to on-street parking management and why it's so important, and I'll define it shortly as well. But even in rich countries like here in Germany in this picture, on-street parking problems can degrade public space, harm multimodal access. We need to do better, even in rich countries. What is parking management? I like to think of it as meeting 3 key goals, as achieving 3 key goals. The first is design. We want to design the parking in a street, if there is parking in a street. Part of design might be saying this street will have no parking, but if we have parking in the street, that parking must be designed in a way that's consistent with everything else we want from that street. And different streets have different priorities. Secondly, we need to ration parking. If we don't ration it in busy areas, it will inevitably be overburdened and people will resort to illegal parking, double parking, all kinds of nuisance parking. And associated with that rationing, usually that will mean pricing, but we also need some enforcement to back up both the design and the rationing so that they work well. Simple, 3 key goals. So pricing. People have an aversion to pricing, and I understand that. It's very understandable and reasonable, but it really does work. And here's the key goal from Professor Donald Shoup is the goal is to just have a few vacancies, enough vacancies that when a new motorist arrives in an area, they can quickly find parking without being a nuisance, whether they're going around in circles or waiting in the street or double parking. And as I said, parking pricing in the streets really works. We know it works. Hundreds of cities have done this and it works. There is absolutely no doubt. Even in Jeddah, a city with only six or seven bus routes, a city of 4 million people with only that many bus routes, it's got almost no public transport. Even in Jeddah, parking pricing worked. And how did it work? Well, it prods people who were previously parking all day and tying up those prime parking spaces. It prods those people to park a little further away in off-street parking or in quieter streets so that these prime spaces are available for the short-term parking, people shopping, for example. Okay, so it really works. It really works. And many cities around the world in all kinds of contexts, low income, middle income, high income, have all improved their on-street parking management. It's not easy. There are various steps, complications. I've got references at the end for you to dig into on how to do this, but many cities are improving their on-street parking management. Yours can too. So government boosting of parking supply is both harmful and unnecessary is the next key argument. Many places and many people jump to the conclusion when they see scenes like this that there must be a parking shortage. And indeed, in the cities that I visited, the authorities believed there was a parking shortage. But just nearby, this is what I found in the off-street parking. Clearly, this was not a case of shortage. And this is what we find time and time again when we do parking studies. It's almost never a shortage. It's almost always a parking management problem. So the old thinking is that when you see a parking problem, we should boost the supply of parking. The new thinking is parking management is the first thing to try. So this weak parking management and on-street parking problems prompt cities to try to boost supply, whether just by subsidizing it, by building it themselves, or by requiring developers and building owners to have parking on site. And this is a really big mistake. Off-street parking doesn't solve the on-street parking problems. I made that point just now. Unless there's on-street parking management that's effective, you won't solve those on-street parking problems. The only exception is if you go to crazy extremes and create landscapes with enormous amounts of parking. Even then, you often don't solve the problem, but we can go to really crazy extremes. This is actually my hometown in Adelaide, in Australia, where there's crazy amounts of parking at, this is a railway station. This is not transit-oriented development. And all of that excessive parking fosters car dependence and excessive traffic. So Bangkok is a poster child of that mistake. Now, here's something that you may not have heard before, a framework that you may not have heard before, but it's relevant to that mistake, and it's a way we can remedy that mistake. And I call it walkable parking, or park once and walk districts. We should think of parking not as something that serves each building, but as something that serves each area. And this is something that helps us to do better. So the problem with the mindset of requiring every building to have enough parking is that it actually makes spillover into a problem when it doesn't need to be a problem. We're trying to have every building have enough parking for its own demand. And then if any one of those building sites, development sites, has an excessive demand at any particular moment, none of the parking in the neighborhood is open to the public. It's all private parking for tenants only, customers only. Suddenly we have a problem and we'll have chaos in the streets. So much better to plan for having a pool of public or shared parking in the neighborhood so that if any one site is short of parking, it can spill over, and that's not a problem. There's no need to be worried about that. That's just parking. And this is how it works in Singapore, for example. There are many places where it works this way without any fuss. But in Singapore, a large proportion of the parking in Singapore is open to the public, even in the public housing estates, office buildings, shopping centres. So if you were to visit a neighbourhood like this, you could park in that building on the right. But if that was full, suppose you're going to that building and you find the parking is full in that building, you could park in the above the market on the left there, or you could park in the public housing estate just around the corner. And it's not a problem. All of that parking is managed, it's priced. No one will chase you away because you're parking there and then walking to another building. So the old thinking is that every building must have enough parking for its own demand. The new thinking, walkable parking or park once and walk thinking, is that parking should be open to the public and shared in park once and walk districts. So finally, we can refrain from boosting parking supply. I've already mentioned that. I'll say a tiny bit more about that. But the key finale point is, let's actually limit parking in order to limit traffic and boost public transport. But we do that in places that are accessible by other modes besides car. We don't necessarily do it everywhere, but it's extremely relevant to transit-oriented development areas. And it need not be scary if the on-street parking is managed well and we've got a park once and walk district. So we can do this. And many cities around the world, some of them for decades, like London and Berlin, have abolished their minimum parking requirements. They no longer try to boost parking supply. It's up to the developers how much parking they build. Many other cities are following that example. It sounds radical, perhaps, if you're used to the idea that governments require parking with buildings, but developers make their own decisions. They usually build some parking, and the effects are, in any case, incremental. You don't immediately create some kind of crisis because the change only occurs as new buildings get built. Okay, so if you've done all of those basics that I've already talked about, you can get ambitious. And again, this might sound radical, but hundreds of cities around the world, in their city centers especially, but also in transit-oriented locations in other parts of the city, like in Seoul, it's many different transit-oriented areas, actually cap the parking or limit the parking using parking management, parking maximums. And the goal is to gradually limit the traffic growth. And again, this is incremental. You impose parking maximums, you don't instantly cause a parking shortage, but gradually as redevelopment occurs, the balance of supply and demand changes, prices will rise, and you will get less traffic. And it really works. Hundreds of cities have tried this. So that was a gallop through the basics of how to make parking policy consistent with boosting public transport. And I'll just end with this slide of places you can look for more information if I've succeeded in making you curious. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was a fantastic presentation. And I actually found Paul through the publication that he was showing on his previous slide. So I highly encourage everyone to go find that and check it out. It's a fantastic resource. I see that we have a few questions in the chat because this has really sparked a great discussion with all the participants. We're a little bit over time, so what I propose we do is we make a note of these questions and we will come back to them at the end of the day with all of the speakers. But we'll be sure to come back to these because I know everyone is really excited about it. So I'd just like to thank both Gil and Paul again for these really exciting presentations. A lot to think about, very ambitious, very bold. So we're really grateful for you for inspiring all of us. At this time, I'd like to hand it back over to Victor, who can take us into our next session.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you to our speakers, Gil and Paul. This was a thought-provoking and inspiring session that will certainly help our audience think ahead as we move towards a post-COVID world. But let us continue thinking about the future. For our next session, we jump now to the future of urban transport in post-COVID-19 cities, where we will distill insights from the Japanese experience. Japan is one of those countries which are a synonym with the world future. And in this case, we will not be disappointed. Haruka Miki, Operations Officer at the World Bank Tokyo Development Learning Center, will be the moderator. Haruka, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Victor. Very great to be here again. So in this session, we are going to explore how COVID-19, social distance, and work from home have really affected lives in the Tokyo metropolitan area and its surrounding suburbs. A mega city that has a very different scale of urban designs and a city which is transport node oriented in nature. We are very lucky to have two speakers perfect for this topic of the post-COVID-19 in cities. Thank you so much to both of you joining this session, Professor Ryuji Fujimura and Mr. Nori Nakayama. Our first speaker, Professor Ryuji Fujimura, works as an associate professor at Tokyo University of the Arts and leads Ryuji Fujimura Architects since 2005. He graduated from Tokyo Institute of Technology, Graduate School of Architecture, and taught at Toyo University prior. He specializes in the architectural design, its education and criticism, city management with public participation in the backdrop of the aging society, and opportunities and challenges around public asset management. Professor Fujimura leads a number of projects that catalyzes the future of Japan, keeping in mind how the urban project could open and impact the society. His main design projects include Nagoya Hisaya Odori Project, Omiya Project, and Tsurugashima Project. Our second speaker, Mr. Nori Nakayama, he is a senior manager of the Business Promotion Group, Tokyu-Line Area Development Headquarters of Tokyo Corporation. After completing a BA in economics of Waseda University, he joined Tokyo Corporation in 1991. In the past 29 years, he spent 23 years in domestic development projects and 6 years in overseas development projects, including Vietnam. His recent achievement, including joining establishment of Viet Hoa International School in Vietnam and suburban regeneration project in the Minami Machida Grand Dairy Park, Tokyo. Thank you so much, Nakayama-san, for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So perhaps we can ask you to mute yourself until we invite you to the speaking. Thank you, Nakayama-san. For those participants who joined the first 3 days of TDD, we learned how Japan has really achieved a rich transport network. Local governments and developers are making full use of the land surrounding transport nodes, maximizing both livability and economic activity. We feel there's a great lesson to our client countries to dig further on a few aspects. So too much information prior, but so Professor Fujimura, before diving into the post-COVID-19 in cities, could you enlighten us with the overall trend for urban fabrics and recent trends of smaller size, more neighborhood level metropolitan regeneration in Japan? Over to you. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, my name is Ryuji Fujimura. Thank you very much for inviting me. So let me share the slide. So let me talk the title, The End of Metropolitan City, the Beginning of Hypervillage, Japan at a Turning Point. My name is Ryuji Fujimura from Tokyo University of the Arts. Let me do a self-introduction. I'm a Tokyo-based architect who has been experimenting in experimental process in architectural design since the mid-2000s. Creating experimental public spaces with communities. My work is concentrated in the periphery of Tokyo. It could be said that the periphery of the big cities is the leading edge of social change that requires an experimental processes. The Great Japan earthquake in 2011 was a turning point for Japan from growth to shrink. In particular, sociologist Hiroshi Kainuma argued that the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant built in the 1970s to supply electricity to major cities such as Tokyo was a part of Japan's modernization processes, and that the accident signaled that the end of the process. Saitama, the suburbs of Tokyo, developed rapidly in the 1970s and 80s. My family also moved to Saitama with an expansion of such a big city. New roads and school had just been built. It was totally new. But in 2012, the Sasago tunnel collapsed in this highway. Around this time, there was a series of accidents involving infrastructure in various parts of Japan, including bridge collapse. Yuji Nemoto, an economist, pointed out that this as a structural problem in his book, Decaying Infrastructure. In the United States, after the great deflation of 1929, public investment was concentrated in the 1930s. In Japan, which started public investment in the 1960s, is following suit 30 years later. And this problem has become more serious in the suburbs of Japan's major cities, such as Tokyo. This is an example due to the concentrated influx of population. In one town in Saitama Prefecture, the population grew rapidly in the 90s and has now leveled off, but the aging of the population is a serious problem, and the construction and welfare budgets were shifted in the mid-2000s. So nowadays, the population structure around Tokyo is shifting. The commuting rate of Saitama Prefecture residents to the city center will drop twice in the course of this change. That 1/3 of the area close to Tokyo is still chosen as a bedroom community, but the 1/3 farther away is an autonomous economic zone. The remaining 1/3 are areas that were chosen by our parents' generation and are no longer chosen by our generation and will be greatly affected by social changes. So we have named this area as the variable commuting zone. So elderly people and vacant house will be concentrated in this variable commuting zone in the future. In particular, the residents of the new towns that were sold in the 1970s and 80s will be over 75 years old by 2025. So measures must be taken within the next 5 years. From now on, Tokyo's suburbs will begin to sort of the surviving suburbs from the decaying suburbs. If communities are preserved, vacant houses are distributed, and management is done well, but the younger generation will flow in, the population will be balanced, and a new steady state can be created. If it fails, it will fall into disrepair. The spread of high capacity of communication environments has opened up new possibilities for suburban residential areas. In central Tokyo, a small house built on a 70 square meter plot of land sells for 70 to 80 million yen. But in this Nakayama new town, you can get a 200 square meter house for 1/5 of the price. Moreover, the infrastructure is in place, and there is no need to pay high fees to take care of children in nursery. So grasping these economical conditions, Nakayama New Town is already attracting artists who create sculptures, carvings, and other works of art. Recently, young people who have left the city center to live in New Town and start their own business have gathered there, creating a new regional economic zone. So this share house is home to university students who commute to the heart of Tokyo. They don't need to commute to the university every day anymore for their online classes, and only needed to visit the campus in the city center from time to time. So they can live in the diverse human connections of the suburbs, which they usually cannot experience in the city center. They call this studying in the suburbs. So in the suburbs, a new culture is emerging in which people, especially the younger generation, occupy public space and market in parks, exchanging products and skills with each other. A new culture is emerging in the suburbs, where people were proud of not only of the low cost of living, but also of suburban life itself. So Tokyo's population is said to peak in the 2030s, after which the aging of the population will become more serious. So it is the railroad network that established the metropolis of Tokyo, or 2027, when the Shibuya TOD is completed, will be the completion of TOD in our country too. And as a result, it will be the last large-scale TOD. So we believe that the service of large cities will stop being part of the metropolis and will be defined as a network of autonomous villages, hypervillages. In Japan, the period from 1970 to 2020 was the era of metropolises. From now on, we will slowly move to the era of hypervillage. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Fujimura. So that was great. So before our session, as Jill nicely mentioned, before and after COVID-19, nothing really has changed, right? In fact, what changed is our perception. Some opportunities are magnified with the lenses of COVID-19. So from your presentation, I took out a few things, such as I think in the time of massive demographic change, urban infrastructure has been reassessed, right? And the cities are focusing more on the neighborhood regeneration. And then I really liked how you also made some examples of how the young generations are making these startups and small community level businesses. So with that, do you have any like insight with the COVID-19 lenses, which is offering a new common challenge for citizens to prepare and transform and update the way we live? Can you share what can really be even more transformed in post-COVID-19? What would change and what would stay? If you can maybe add a few comments, then we can pass to Nakayama-san afterward. Thank you.
Yes. I think that this 2020 is the year of COVID-19, but also as a change of the typology of a city, from metropolis to hypervillage, I think. Then this COVID-19 situation kind of accelerate the change of this city typology. Then these hypervillage people, or like the young people in the new towns, they are kind of showing how they are doing in the from now on. That is my how I found from the activities in the suburbs.
Thank you so much. So we will come back to you if we have maybe more minutes to ask more questions. So thank you so much, Professor Fujimura. Now, this is actually a great segue, welcoming Nakayama-san, because Tokyo does both the urban regeneration in a massive transit node like a Shibuya, but they also do a corridor level TOD development, right? So Nakayama-san, giving this opportunity, can you perhaps explain how the Tokyo's corridor level TOD development has shifted before and after COVID-19? And what are the lessons and opportunities for the railway company like yourself? Over to you.
operation in Japan. So, okay, let's get down to the main topic anyway. So, next page. First of all, I'd like to show you key takeaway of my presentation. There are three. COVID-19 has forced Tokyo to change our business strategy from a TOD model to autonomously distributed and cooperative city model. Large structural reforms such as adoption of mass brings about significant challenges. However, it will also bring enormous business opportunities and show a new way of regional development to the world. So cooperation with local governments is essential to achieve the structural change. Next page. Tokyo is a private railway company and have areas served by Tokyo's railway lines. Main business field is the areas along the Tokyu-Lines. We have continued to provide transportation business, real estate business, and life service business in order to make our areas most popular in Japan for living. Next page. So this is a route map of Tokyu-Lines. Line distance is around 100 kilometers, and the number of passengers carried in 2019 was 1.2 billion. But sadly, I don't think these carried numbers will achieved anymore. COVID-19 changed our business strategy completely. Next page. So there is a past development track record in terms of real estate business along the Tokyu-Lines. So next page. So there are the major commercial facilities in terms of life service business along the Tokyu-Line. There are so many. So next page. So this line chart shows the impact of COVID-19. As you can see, it has had enormous negative impact on our business. This diagram on left side indicates the TOD structure. Size and depth of color shows the scale and the degree of economic integration around each station. COVID-19 has faded the color, so to speak. So next page. This line chart shows Tokyo Store's year-on-year revenue change compared to the same month of previous year. Tokyo Store is a grocery store, by the way. As you can see, the revenue located in residential suburb has increased significantly. So this fact suggests that the balance of consumption has shifted from city center to residential suburb. Next page. So this picture on right side shows diagram in the areas served by Tokyo's railway lines. Tokyo will create daily economic unit in residential area by adding new functions such as work and communication. Residents in Tokyo's railway lines can select workplace of the day, for example. Each economic unit is autonomous and will be distinguished according to the scene of daily life. Tokyo believes this structure adapted to a new normal lifestyle will make up for the downtrend of TOD and gives us new business opportunities. We call this structure autonomously distributed and cooperative city. Next page. Next, I'd like to show you two trials we are doing now to realize autonomously distributed and cooperative city. First trial is a project in Aobadai area in collaboration with Japan Post and Yokohama City. As described in this sheet, each player has its own interest and purpose. But fundamentally, we have common goal, which is make the community lively, attractive, and profitable. Next page. The second floor and third floor of the building owned by Japan Post was underutilized. Tokyo and Yokohama City encouraged the Japan Post to change the floor into the place where I can work, communicate, and make a profit. After renovation work, Tokyo rents the entire floor and sublease it to Yokohama City and other tenants, which will be contributing to the realization of daily economic unit. This local-based activity hub is scheduled to open this summer. Next page. I'd like to show you the second trial. COVID-19 has changed our lifestyle dramatically. In response to the changes, Tokyo decided to provide these 5 comprehensive transportation proposals that support cities of the future and human mobility by utilizing the method of MaaS. Next page. MaaS is often recognized as integrated transportation system, but I don't think it's sufficient. Transportation itself is not a purpose, but a tool to achieve the purpose. Hence, MaaS should be a means to see some friend, watch a movie, and have a dinner at the restaurant. Tokyo can provide such kind of holistic service because we are the comprehensive lifestyle company. Next page. MaaS pilot project called Dento was launched on January 13th. Dento is the holistic package with a mixture of transportation and life services. This is a trial to figure out if we could take in a new demand of work and movement in the residential area, if we could create new incidental business opportunities through the transportation service, if it could appeal especially to commuter pass holders. Next page. I'd like to show you more specific from 3 different points of view, which are transportation, teleworking, and encouragement of additional spending. First is transportation service. There are 2. Shared rides of taxi, which is limited to commuter pass holders. Commuter express bus, which is discounts available for commuter pass holders. Next page. Second is diverse options for teleworking. We are offering various options such as cafes, sports gym, and outdoor space. As for sports gym, increase of revenue is remarkable under the state of emergency. It's a very good for customers' health and our business. Next page. So third is encouragement of travel and Tokyo Group facilities. Now we are offering 2 services to the customer who has commuter pass. The reason why limited to commuter pass holders is to guide users to settle down along Tokyu-Lines. One is one-day 100 yen tickets for trains and buses. And the other is special coupons, mainly for use at Tokyo Group facilities. The effect of these 2 services are outstanding. The profit from Tokyo Group facilities exceeds the cost of one-day tickets significantly. Now, Tokyo is in the midst of chaos, but I believe we can get through it and create a bright future. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nakayama-san. So that was wonderful. I think many people are very pleased to see the actual tangible cases and what the Tokyo are doing, because we've heard a lot about your, theory regeneration. And now maybe it's also interesting to see how the business model has been shifting, right? Maybe I would like to ask a question to you and then bring back Professor Fujimura as well, because we got one question to Professor Fujimura from the floor. Meanwhile, Nakayama-san, perhaps I can ask you one question. So the current read, so the current read of definition of suburban urban fabrics. How do you see the opportunity for TOD? Because I think you are still trying to regenerate Shibuya as a transit node. It's a massive node. I cannot even remember how many railway companies are actually passing. There are quite a few. How do you guys see how you want to actually do the regeneration of the transit node like Shibuya, at the same time maybe looking at these new models in the suburban area? That's a different things you are doing right now. So can you elaborate a little bit? What's your strategy in these larger metropolitan transit node?
So around 3 million passengers use at Shibuya station a day. before COVID. So it's a very important topic for me to figure out how city center like Shibuya should be changed. Office building in city center, for example, must have the reason to come all the way from home. So fortunately, Shibuya is regarded as a sacred area for cutting-edge IT engineers and has still popular among IT industry. In addition, it should be implemented safety measures of avoiding infectious disease, such as keeping distances, equipped with non-contact devices, and improving ventilation performance. So I visited some showroom of future office last week to see how it ought to be. I cannot find out what's the exact answer yet, but still continue to seek. Yes.
Thank you so much. By the way, I live actually 15 minutes by walk from Shibuya Station. So I do go to Shibuya Station pretty frequently. Even during the state of emergency, try to refrain from going, but then we'll still see enough people to kind of sustain the business. So I guess we just need to go and just practice and see what's going to happen in 2 years' time. Thank you. Can we perhaps bring back Professor Fujimura on the table as well, because there was this question from a client. Thank you, Professor Fujimura, once again. So we got this question from Mr. Jacob. He is a client from Uganda. He asked the question, Professor Fujimura, thank you so much for your insight into the future. For metropolitan like a Greater Kampala, where TOD is yet to be implemented, so that we have a big cities within like Shibuya. You seem to recommend smaller TOD centers to be developed in the future. So basically, for Japan, we already have this very developed TOD, which is covering all over the Tokyo metropolitan area. What's your recommendation for those cities, mega cities, who are yet to implement TOD? What is maybe the most a reasonable first step at this moment, given the COVID-19 and of course the demographic is increasing, so it's a different trend from Japan.
So I'm not sure the situation in the country, but in Japan, and it has been clearly divided the areas of residential area and working area before, but now it's started mixing each other. So it's a kind of reclaiming the role as a place to work from just a role of as a residential area in this for suburbs. So it's the decentering movement has been started in Japan. So now we start to think about the new possibility of the suburbs right now. Then maybe this decentering process will be occurred in many countries. So I think that we need to think more about the new transportation network or new mobilities from suburbs to suburbs in order to network more in physical spaces. That's how
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Fujimura. I think this is very interesting and also very sensitive, because I think one thing which is pretty safe to say is the mixed use is definitely something we are seeking in Japan, right? So this is happening in a residential area, as you said, where we have too much housing stock, but maybe less activity in placemaking, and they are trying to revitalize that. On the other hand, even in the city center like Omotesando, you will see pretty these apartments, which is mixed use, and on the top floor of the commercial building, you see these residential. So I really see that even before COVID-19, and I understand maybe this trend could be something very applicable to our client country. So I'm mindful of this time. I think we are very happy to say we managed to make this presentation in 30 minutes. So Professor Fujimura and Nakayama-san, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you. And now we would like to bring back Victor on back to the stage. Thank you so much to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haruka. Thank you, Ryuji and Noriaki. It was very enlightening to learn about your experience and new ideas coming from Japan's perspective. Now I would like to invite to the stage Felipe Targa, Senior Transport Specialist of the World Bank, who will moderate the latter half of this session. But before that, let me just give a technical announcement. This segment will be conducted both in Japanese and in English. For the TDD participants who are in the Hopin platform, please turn on now your simultaneous interpretation widget. As a reminder, let me show you again how to connect to the translation. If the studio can please share the slides so I can show how you connect. While we saw the slide, let me just go over the steps you have to do. So remember that you have to go to the right-hand side of the screen where you will see the Stage tab. Under the Stage tab, please click the Translation tab. Second step is to select English in the drop-out menu. You can select different languages. And finally, step 3, please click Connect, and then you are set. Finally, just to remind you that once you are connected to the translation, please lower the stage audio by adjusting the volume bar at the bottom left-hand side of the screen. Don't forget to adjust the volume back to the original audio level after the session. And with this, we start the next segment. Felipe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor, and hello, everyone. This second part of the session, we're going to be focusing on one of the topics that we mentioned and we covered on day 2, the importance of that last mile connectivity to enhance access to transit stations. We're going to be hearing, from a local expert in Japan about, I'm not aware, you probably know that the Dutch and the Danish, are the top cycles nation. You will be surprised, to hear that Japan is actually third in the world on that. And we're going to be hearing, that how is that is done, for the last mile connectivity, to improve that access to mass transit station. We'll also be hearing about the bicycle as a mode of neighborhood transport, for transport families to the children to schools and run neighborhood errands. And of course, the whole intermodal connectivity policies in Japan. And for that, I will like to invite Mr. Takashi Kurisu. He's a lead engineer working at Pacific Consultants. He has more than 10 years of experience in transportation planning and specializes in bicycle policy. In addition to that, he's the executive director of a bicycle portal called Tabirin. You are welcome to check that out. And he's interestingly also a cyclist, a semi-professional cyclist. I would say he has, participated in cycling road races, in Gran Fondos, and so on. So with that, let me hand it over to Mr. Kurisu. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. 聞こえますでしょうか ?OK。じゃあ、早速プレゼンを始めたいと思います。じゃあ、次のページお願いします。まず、最初に、自己紹介ですけれども、先ほどご紹介いただきましたが、私、普段はパシフィックコンサルタンツという株式会社に勤めておりまして、建設コンサルの仕事をしながら、その傍らで、日本各地をサイクリングしたりですね、自転車ロードレースの選手として、2017年から19年にはですね、アマチュアの世界選手権ですけれども、出場したりしています。こうした実際のユーザーの目線とですね、技術者の目線の両方から、普段様々なプランニングに携わっているところでございます。次のページお願いします。本日の発表内容でございますけれども、日本における自転車の利用と駐輪スペースの確保というところを、主たるテーマとしまして、その概要ですとか課題、そしてその解決策 あとはスマートシティとも絡めまして、近年のトレンドであるシェアサイクルとコロナに関する影響についてご紹介させていただきます。次のページお願いします。まず、日本の交通の特有の状況でございますけれども、写真の左側のようにですね、日本では1970年頃から長らく自転車歩道を通行するという状況になっています。この背景にはですね、モータリゼーションの進展で急増した自転車と自動車の事故から、自転車をですね、ある種救うための緊急的措置の対応でございましたけれども、その後今度はですね、自転車と歩行者の事故が増加するようになりまして、2011年頃から写真の右側のようにですね、自転車の車道の通行を徹底する流れという動きになっております。なお、右側の写真からも分かる通り、左側通行ということも日本の特有の、特徴の一つです。次のページをお願いします。こちらは日本の自転車の保有台数です。実はですね、日本は自動車と同程度、約7000万台程度、自転車が保有されています。これは日本の人口の2分の1、つまり2人に1人ぐらいが自転車を保有するという水準になっています。次のページをお願いします。こちらは自転車の利用の状況ですけれども、全目的に対する自転車の分担率を諸外国と比較したものですけれども、日本はすべての移動のうち 12% で自転車が利用されています。これは世界の自転車先進国であるオランダですとかデンマークに次いで多い割合で利用されています。次のページをお願いします。先ほどのプレゼンにもありました通り、こちら渋谷の写真ですけれども、ご存知の通り日本は非常に限られた土地空間の中で様々な施設がもう目いっぱい詰め込まれた状態でして、外区と非常に狭い状況です。こうした中で、特に東京のような都市部においてはですね、公共交通が非常に発達したというところもありまして、渋滞の激しい自動車よりもですね、鉄道がよく利用されていて、その中で自宅から駅、あるいは駅から目的地までの、ラストワンマイルの移動手段として自転車が多く利用されています。しかし当然そのためには駐輪スペースの確保というところが非常に重要となります。次のページをお願いします。そこで問題というか課題ですけれども、実はこれまで日本においてはですね、放置自転車の戦いというところが自転車との歴史の一つでもありました。過去40年間、自転車の放置台数がピークだった約100万台から、その過去40年間で、今現在まで全国 4.4 万台まで放置自転車を減少させてきました。しかし、それでもまだまだ一部地域、主に都市部なんですけれども、依然として放置自転車が問題となっています。これはですね、やはり歩行者の安全に関する部分が非常に大きく、通行空間を邪魔にならないように駐輪場を設置しなきゃいけないという状況でございます。次のページをお願いします。これに対するソリューションですけれども、国土交通省ですね、は限られた空間でも駐輪スペースを整備するという中で、これまであまり整備されてこなかった道路上にも駐輪スペースを整備していこうというところで指針を作成しましたりですとか、駐輪場全体の整備に関するガイドライン的なものも作成をしてまいりました。こういったことの検討も弊社、我々内容の検討に携わってきたところでございます。次のページをお願いします。ソリューションの2つ目ですけれども、しかしそういったガイドラインがあっても、なかなか整備はやはり難しいと。そうしたときに、現場の中でのこちら工夫点になりますけれども、やはり歩道などの道路上に駐輪スペースを設けるという普段、ソリューションを取ろうとしたときに、歩行者の安全の観点から有効福音を確保するということが条件になってきます。そこでこちらの例はですね、自転車の入車角というものを15度から 30度程度に設定することによって、斜めに駐輪させることによって、歩道の有効福音を確保した事例です。このようにすることで駐輪できる数というものは減りますけれども、その分歩道の空間を確保することができます。次のページをお願いします。そして、こちらの例はですね、歩道だけでなく、公開空地を活用した事例です。中心の赤い線より右側が歩道、すなわち道路空間。左側が公開空地です。一番右端にですね、駐輪スペースを設置した事例ですけれども、実は歩道だけではなかなか十分な有効福音が確保できないのですが、その隣接する公開空地とセットで考えることによって必要な有効福音を確保したという事例です。次のページをお願いします。またこちらはですね、道路空間に存在するデッドスペースを活用して駐輪スペースを確保した事例です。左側の写真は植樹帯の間に駐輪スペースを確保。右側の写真は高架下の柱の間、普段歩行者が通らないような場所に駐輪スペースを確保した事例です。このようにですね、細かな工夫、クリエイティブな工夫を施すことによって、限られた都市空間の中でも駐輪スペースを確保してきています。次のページをお願いします。ソリューションの3つ目は IoT に関することです。 駐輪場をより賢く使うということで、こちらの写真はですね、自転車に IC タグを取り付けることで、駐輪場内の台数をリアルタイムに把握をするというものです。これによって、駐輪場が満杯なのか空いているのかをリアルタイムにユーザーに表示させることによって、空いている駐輪場にユーザーを誘導すると。また、IC タグによって自動開閉のゲートを設けることでですね、ユーザースムーズな入退場というものが可能になるとともに、盗難の心配もなく安心して利用できるようになるというものです。次のページをお願いします。また、駐輪場内のリアルタイムな台数を把握するということは、よりスマートな駐輪場運営を可能にします。すなわち、利用状況に合わせて、例えば平日と休日で、駐輪場の定期の利用と一時の利用のその総数を弾力的に設定することによって、より、空いている時間帯というものがないように設定すると、よりスマートな運用が可能になります。このように IoT を活用した駐輪の運用と駐輪場の設置というものは、スマートシティのあり方の一つでもあると言えます。次のページをお願いします。そしてそのスマートな自転車利用として、近年トレンドとして上がっているのがシェアサイクルです。こちらも自転車と IoT の融合の事例の一つですけれども、駐輪場の整備というのは自分の保有する自転車ユーザーを主に対象としていることになりますけれども、シェアサイクルは自転車を持たない人でも自宅から駅、または駅から目的地といったラストワンマイルの利用を可能にします。加えて、シェアサイクルは盗難される心配がないということも大きなメリットでもあります。日本では不特定多数の人に利用できるサービスということで、公共性の観点からガバメントによるシェアサイクルへの支援が始まっています。次のページをお願いします。現在、日本では全国で約200の都市にシェアサイクルが導入されています。次のページをお願いします。その中でこちら、東京のサイクルポートの設置状況です。一番左の図のように2016年に開始した当初、200ポートでしたけれども、その5年後、2021年には800ポートまで約4倍になりました。これはロンドンに匹敵する水準です。この短期間でこれだけ整備が進んだ背景には、東京都による強力な支援、すなわち補助事業としての支援が背景にあります。次のページをお願いします。こちらはコロナの影響がシェアサイクルにどのような影響を及ぼしたかを示した図です。一番左のグラフが全国の利用者数の平均値を示したものです。日本でコロナの緊急事態宣言前から後にかけて利用者が増加しておりまして、これはすなわちソーシャルディスタンスを確保し、他者との接触を回避する移動手段としてシェアサイクルへのニーズが高まったことを示しています。次のページをお願いします。こちらが最後のページになりますけれども、特に東京のシェアサイクルサービスがコロナに与えた影響の一例を示したものです。特にですね、新たな利用方法として、デリバリーサービスの移動手段としての利用ですとか、週末の家族とのサイクリングの利用、そういったものが増加しています。これはコロナでの外出自粛によって運動不足を解消するという手段としてもシェアサイクルが着目されたというところになります。このようにですね、環境に良くて健康的で、しかも観光やレジャーにも活用できるという、そういう自転車のポテンシャルというものがコロナをきっかけに再度見直されたというところでございまして、よりスマートシティ、あるいはサステイナブルなシティ作りに向けて、この自転車、あるいはシェアサイクル、あるいはスマートな駐輪場というところが今後ますます重要になってくると考えられます。以上です。ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, Mr. Kurisu, for an excellent presentation. Maybe I just want to provide a comment and a comparison of these numbers. On day 2, we saw the case of the Dutch, 4-mode, what they call the integration of train plus bike, and if you see all the trips, that are done by train, 50% come by a bicycle trip. So that problem, that's the good problem, that every city wants to have, where to store those all those bicycles. You see probably in the news, Utrecht, the new parking facility at the central station for 30,000 bicycles, and of course, the strategy that we saw here for Japan and Tokyo, how you incentivize, the use of bike share systems. Actually, in the Netherlands, the train company created the bike share company, and last 2 years that I was seeing the data, membership was growing, was doubling every year, as we saw, that the case of Tokyo. So I think that reinforces, the key argument of focusing of that, the importance of last mile connectivity to metro station as a TOD strategy. And I don't know if we have time for some questions. Yeah, we have five times, for reaction and question. I don't know if Mr. Kurisu would like, to reflect on that comment, or if we can take any questions from the floor.
じゃあ質問よろしくお願いします。
Okay, I don't know if I'm seeing the chat from the event. Let me check. We have no questions. So let me ask you about to Mr. Kurisu. How's the besides those numbers that we saw for Tokyo, and what is going on in other cities? Is bicycle use because COVID after COVID growing as well? Are there also bike share systems similar to the one that you show in the presentation for Tokyo being implemented in other cities in Japan?
ありがとうございます。まず1点目のご質問ですけれども、他の都市でも自転車の利用が進んでいるかというところのご質問でございますが、基本的にはかなり日本国内さまざまなところで自転車の利用がコロナによって注目を浴びているというところは言われております。具体的な数字というのは統計上なかなか出てこないんですけれども、先ほど後半にお見せしたシェアサイクルの利用者数の統計情報を見ると、特に東京がある関東エリアの利用状況が伸びているという、そういう状況であります。また、シェアサイクルの導入に関しましては、国内の特に都市部、東京ですとか、大阪ですとか、そういった大きな都市部では特にシェアサイクルは導入が進んでいるというところです。
Thank you very much. We have one question from Stanimira Nikolava. Thank you very much for the presentation. I love your method for parking for the bikes where there is a dead space on the sidewalks. I have one question. How do you specify the so-called dead space on the sidewalk? Do you have an automatic method or any tools to identify those areas? Thank you.
ありがとうございます。デッドスペースを特定する方法というのはやはりなかなかないんですけれども、いくつかの特徴的な事例はあります。先ほど申し上げた植樹帯の間ですとか、高架橋の下以外にもですね、例えば、地下鉄の駅の裏側みたいな歩行者がなかなか歩かない空間ですとか、あるいは施設と施設の間の歩行者が同じく歩かないスペース、そういったようなところをですね、活用するというところがあるかなと思います。
Thank you for the response. I think we are just running out of time, but we would like to wrap up, and move to the next item in the agenda. And thank you very much for an excellent presentation, Mr. Kurisu. And I will just hand it over, to my colleagues to continue the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Victor, you are muted.
Oh, thank you very much, Felipe. Thank you very much, Takashi, also. And thank you for this session. And with this, we conclude today's segment open to the public. Thank you to all of you that have been watching via Vimeo stream.